Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Inside Suicide. This dialogue will explore both established and emerging practices in suicide prevention and intervention. With our panelists today, we hope to identify some promising approaches that show potential for effectively reducing suicides and improving support for individuals at risk and their families. And we can discuss how these strategies can be adapted or expanded to increase their impact. I will be one of your moderators today. My name is Suzanne Bailey. I am a social worker, and I'm currently the development lead for the Road to Mental Readiness, Mental Health and Resilience training with the Canadian Armed Forces. And I'm very happy to be joined by my co-moderator today, Margaret, who will introduce herself, and then we'll ask our guests to introduce themselves. So over to you, Margaret.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. My name is Margaret Campbell. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Aging and Family Science at Mount St. Vincent University, and that's located on the east coast of Canada in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
All right, thanks, Margaret. Sherry.
Hi there. I am Sherry Lux. I am the widow of a fallen RCMP officer, and I speak candidly about our story in the hopes of helping other people. I also penned my memoir called Finding My Fire, and I try to spread awareness and help other people where I can. So thank you for having me.
All right, thanks, Sherry. We're very glad you were able to join us. And Mike.
Hey, I've just retired from contract, what's called contract policing, frontline policing in Alberta, to counterterrorism, to tactical. And relevant to this conversation, the last few years have been working as strategic operational advisor for Commissioner Creek, who I see as a champion for mental health awareness and support in Canadian policing and with specific to families. And one of my roles informally was serving as his ambassador to families of our fallen, as well as sitting on the board of directors of the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police Forum, and most importantly, relative to this conversation, being actively involved on the board or boards within Canada Beyond the Blue, and working with SOUL, the survivors of law enforcement, as well as Solace. So the last few years, and that was what led to that, or what brings my passion to it, passion, compassion, and empathy, is prior to that, working with members and their families that were going through mental health difficulties, or even a lot of pressures within the family, and integrating work with family pressures. So that's what brings me to this table.
All right. Thanks, Mike. It sounds like you both bring a phenomenal amount of experience to today's discussion. So we're very glad you're able to join us.
We really are. So really, just to give folks some context, throughout this series, we've been exploring how families experience suicide, the way research frames or even approaches what we know or what we can say about suicide, whether that's postvention or intervention. We've had a particular focus on memorialization and postvention practices. And in this episode, we want to kind of take a look towards what's working. We've talked a little bit throughout each episode about what's not really working for families, for organizations, for individuals. And we're looking to think about, like, what are some promising practices that maybe offer a bit of hope and practical guidance for supporting public safety families. So, Sherry, from your perspective, what kind of practices or supports do families find most meaningful or effective in this space?
Honestly, I think people need to understand that just having their presence and their compassion during such a sensitive and scary, chaotic time means so much more, I think, than people realize. Taking the time to go for a cup of coffee, taking a time to be a listening ear. I think that translates so much further than people realize, that human connection and opening up about your story, whatever that may be. And I even remember when my husband was struggling with his PTSD, and he started to make such great strides with his mental health when he started opening up to his friends and his colleagues. He had already been in therapy at that point, but it was a different level of understanding when you have that peer support. And when he started opening up, his friends started opening up. And it was actually amazing to see, and even to see the bonding that created. And then I can translate that to my story as well. So when we were struggling with his PTSD, as well as when we were grieving after his death, just having those people, just that compassion, it's not, doesn't have to be overly complicated in that sense. Just showing up and being that listening ear and that soft place to land, really.
Thanks so much. Compassion and connection seem just key here, right? No matter what approach or we're taking in research or practice or what therapeutic techniques we're trying to employ, right? So thank you very much. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you, and just drawing on your experience here, from what you've seen, are there any new changes or new approaches in policing or public safety that you feel have made a real difference in preventing suicide or supporting families?
Well, yes, there's been, I can say in the last 8 years, significant changes institutionally that have worked themselves down to the unit, to platoon, to individuals. If we look at the tragedies that I'll speak as an Ontario provincial police officer, and that's where my experience is. I did have experience with friends taking their lives in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, but it really hit home in 2018, the tragedies that our family suffered, our members suffered, with 3 very back-to-back incidents of members taking their lives. That really started a groundswell of introspection and change. So it's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to do something to make the change. And there are so many levels in that. If we go down to the basic first one of healthy workplace teams, and reaching out to individually help members, but just knowing they're there, and some of the byproducts of that all of a sudden we had care navigators that help members and their families through difficult situations, alleviating the stress and everything that goes with that, be it medical or mental. I've used them twice and found them to be exceptional. One of my employees passed, and the family was having tremendous difficulty, and the filling of the void in helping the family by the care navigators was outstanding. And then even with my own family, trying to get help, for a member of my family, it was just moving that right along. So back to that integration of work and life. People call it balance, but it never really balances. You got to learn how to sew it together. And getting that done. And so that was a big first step. And then from that, we have the efforts to build psychological resilience. And that comes from, having the psychologists in each region, having them open, having systems in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we had it. I had to go for psychological assessments a number of times, be it from undercover or from a foreign mission, or being in an incident where life was taken or lost, and it's hard to associate between the two. So I've got experience at that. But then just having that more institutionalized and checks. And a big thing that we miss in all that as we build these structures is a lot of the strong byproducts that we have now that are buddy checks. And we're reminded, on our emails and messaging within, are we doing our buddy checks? Are we looking after each other? And that's where the responsibility initially lies, is individually. That, we always talk about how tight people are when they're, working on the front line or working in tough situations. Ergo, in my view, the initial responsibility falls on us as buddies, as partners, as friends, as family, to get it going, to initiate, to recognize and move forward. And all these things that we're building help us be aware and help us recognize and then respond. And that's a big thing. When I was speaking to my wife about this, she said, how are you feeling and all that? And looking back on 50 years, I said, well, the big change is, we're not told to be tough guys anymore. That's the biggest thing, and we're allowed to express our feelings and share our feelings. My first week on work, one of our guys on our detachment was shot, and it was just kind of get on with it, move forward. When I came back from the war in Yugoslavia during a dirty spat there in '92, I remember my doctor telling me, phooey, beer and buddies will fix it. Just, move on with it. And that was like a medical doctor going, and at the time it sounded good to me. And away I went and moved forward. And that kind of draws into the importance of solace, Canada Beyond the Blue. When reflecting, when we spoke Friday, I mentioned, looking as a master of ceremonies at the memorial ceremony, looking out and seeing the families and seeing the care and love that's being extended to them, feeling their appreciation and hearing it and moving forward and thinking about it this morning. Another, speaking of byproducts, is looking at the police officers and their support for one another, their missing of their friends, and their reflection on how we got to this and how we can better protect and move forward. And Canada Beyond the Blue, and we talk about the memorials and all that, but it's also very active in prevention. And I've been involved at a very minor level, just as a contact to move it through, in saves where police chiefs have called and said, I've got a member that's really going through a tough time. And being able to call Canada Beyond the Blue and have a person at the house, a professional at the house within an hour, and moving things through. So it's that network thing, that a trusted network that is being built. But also, Sherry mentioned a human connection, the connections with the families of the survivors. And from that, for those of us that are working at it and then influencing our policing community, it raises that awareness and the importance of the buddy checks, the importance of looking after each other, and from our families, the importance of actually living up to our pledge that we will remember. Sorry, get a little. Sure. So, all to say and then we get into things that we don't notice that are quite beneficial, and we build them for the community, like the mobile crisis intervention teams. And we're always like outward focused when you go. But from that comes, for the police officers that are on scene, comes a better understanding and an education, of watching the professionals that are accompanying the police officers handle the situation. It takes a great deal of stress off that individual police officer that, okay, they've got it, and I'm just here to make sure everybody's okay and to facilitate whatever outcomes come of this and go forward. But for that police detachment, for that police service, that platoon, it's a tremendous education and a tremendous lesson in compassion. And then from that, empathy, moving forward. Empathy is putting compassion into action and getting forward, but it makes us better people, those interactions. So there's all those changes. I've gone on quite a bit. But it's almost like building a scaffold, and we'll never get to the top of the building, but we've got to keep strengthening that scaffold and keep looking not only forward, but looking back a bit and looking sideways at all times to make sure that we're all looking after one another.
I love hearing this, Mike, because you said a lot of these initiatives started in 2018. And when my husband passed, it was 2017. And so there was a lot of stigma around mental health. We made his funeral about PTSD awareness. He was the first RCMP officer in Canada to get to be acknowledged as an operational stress injury because of his suicide with his PTSD. So we were kind of trying to make strides. We were lucky enough to be surrounded by a fantastic network. And I often wondered if we were trying so hard to be this voice to help other people. I didn't know if we were just kind of lucky that we had this incredible network locally in terms of the colleagues and people that we are surrounded with at headquarters in Regina. And I've often wondered that because I know not everybody has felt that in their grieving process, or even in the years where we were struggling as a family with the PTSD and the codependency and all of the dynamics that were going on in our home at the time. And it was a very lonely time. And so to hear now that there are facilitators in place to help with families, we relied heavily on the RCMP chaplain. He was my late husband's go-to person for probably the last 2 years when he was really struggling. And I actually didn't even really know much about the chaplain's role until after he had passed away. And then we became very close. And I think it was kind of his way of helping my late husband by being there for his family, even in his death. And so I'm so happy to hear all of these strides and initiatives that have been made moving forward, because I totally resonate when you said, the beer and the buddies, because I remember many night shifts ending with a bunch of men around the table and a bottle of whiskey, and they're all decompressing. And that was just the culture. That was the norm. And it's just nice to see people talking about their mental health and having people around to help them with it when they need it.
Yeah, that's true. And, I thank you both for highlighting the importance of, the evolution that's happened in attitudes regarding mental health, both, in society at large, but also within, public safety and military communities, and the importance of that evolution of attitudes. But I think you're also highlighting, a related factor, and that's sort of acknowledging the impact of this type of work on the mental health of those who carry out these roles, and normalizing that it does have an impact on people. And so I thank you both for highlighting some of the key things that have helped move the conversation forward and moved us to a point where, as you say, we encourage people to connect and to talk about these things and to show compassion for each other and educate them early on about some of these factors. So I'm wondering, Mike, in what you've seen in your incredible career, what kinds of barriers or challenges have you seen that organizations or communities can encounter when they try to implement some of these practices that we know can be quite effective?
I think the word you just mentioned is the big one, stigma, and breaking the old mindset. That barrier is still alive within some police services. So in my mind, it comes down to leadership. I have often said, not policing anymore, that, an organization adopts the character of its leader. So it comes down to the leadership being informed, being engaged. And again, I come back to solace at that and seeing the first year we had some police chiefs and they spoke highly about it. And I got to, be on the front line of some of that conversation representing Commissioner Creek on the board of directors, but then of the OACP and what came out of that. And then the second year to see the exponential growth in the participation of senior police leaders and more police officers there, sent to me that the message is permeating through leadership, the importance of this, and then also being called, sitting in the role I did, getting calls from other police services asking me to help them navigate setting up their own units similar to us, where I just pass them off to a professional. I've always had the easiest job. I don't have to be an expert at anything, just have to know where to find one. So fortunately, there were lots of experts within the Ontario Provincial Police, within the Toronto Police Service, and others. We could start to, they could start to build the network. And I was an observer and facilitator, and they along with outside organization, Wounded Warriors, Canada Beyond the Blue, just our work to strengthen the community and, most importantly, take it down to the individual level.
Leadership and stigma, yes, those are two big ones. And Sherry, in the work that you do, what kinds of strategies have you seen that can help address some of the barriers that still exist?
I honestly, I always go back to just talking about it. I open up very candidly, quite raw, actually, the stories that I share. I think there needs to be more of that. The RCMP had actually sent me away for codependency treatment. And that was when I really learned the power of peer support. I had never done group therapy in that type of a setting before, where there were no egos, there were no masks. We were just raw and vulnerable. And that level of opening up was almost contagious. You want to open up. And as soon as you start to feel the healing effects of that, it just kind of takes on its own momentum. So I've been a very firm believer in being candid, because that stigma is real. It's alive and well. I think there's been a lot of strides, but even the self stigma, when someone is suffering, people are harder on themselves than other people are on them, and that's not easy to get over. So when you're already, struggling with your mental health, and of course it's all exacerbated with the anxiety and all the symptoms that come with PTSD, everything's just so much more heightened. I just, removing that self-stigma, it's not an easy thing to do, because I just saw what it did to my late husband in terms of, he felt like he was always letting the family down, and felt like he was always letting the kids down, and the colleagues and things like that. And so he was much harder on himself. But even after his death, the stigma was there. It was there in terms of people were ignorant maybe to really what that journey of PTSD looked like and how much of a struggle his mental health was. The stigma was even there with other widows, in terms of how how members had died. So the stigma is there. I think it's getting better. And so the best practices that I have found the most helpful for me, that I pass along, is just taking down that barrier and opening up that door to communication, and providing safe spaces for other people to do the same.
Absolutely, making it okay to talk about it, and not judging people's individual experiences. I think that's very powerful. And so, what would each of you say that we still need to learn to more effectively support those who are impacted? Whether that's the prevention and intervention part of suicide, or supporting families and others who are impacted after a death by suicide. What do we need to learn?
I'm not sure where organizations are at right now with this particular element, but I know this was an area that I specifically struggled in when my husband's mental health was deteriorating. Was I actually didn't know where to go. So he was trying to hide it for obvious reasons. He's trying to manage it. He's trying to downplay it. It seemed to kind of get away on him at certain times more than others. And I was on the sidelines and I'm watching these changes in him, and I'm seeing these personality changes, and I'm seeing him not sleeping, and I'm seeing the effects of all of this, and it's compounding. And I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't want to get him in trouble. I didn't know if I could go to his friends. I didn't want, it's like I wanted to protect his privacy, but I also knew he needed to get help. And I didn't know where there was a safe place for me to go that wouldn't have repercussions for him. So I'm not sure, maybe that's come further along in the last few years. But for me, that was definitely a real fear during the hardest years, in some of his darkest times. So that was probably the biggest thing that I would really like to see moving forward. And I'm hoping there has been some headway in that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you raise an important point, because as a family member, you want to help your spouse and ensure that they get the help they need, but you understand that it's complex in this type of environment, and there's a potential for career impact. So it's a fine line. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
I believe, since Sherry's experience, again speaking within the Ontario Provincial Police, and to a degree a radius emanating from that, or that we're within, we are really working hard. Not only the police service itself, but the Ontario Provincial Police Association is extremely invested in this, and created the Encompass program within the association to help our members and help their families. So, it's that two-pronged approach. You can go to the association, or you can go within the organization, but in the end, it works together. It brings it all together, that it's one entity working forward and coming up. And I've been, back to the old days individually. A wife that was in the situation Sherry was in was the one that alerted me to one of ours. And it goes back to that attitude, if we can think beyond the initial difficulty. It's that old saying, everybody's going through something. So, when a member gives you 23 years of stellar service, then all of a sudden their performance deteriorates a bit. My point was, ask why it's deteriorating, or look beyond, or stop for a second and think. Go home, put your head in a pillow and think about this. What's going on in their lives, and explore that, rather than treating it, that, it's a performance issue rather than a health issue, and going forward. And I think we're better at that. The barriers that I'd run into with people saying, they're just, and going, oh, for God's sakes, and go forward. So that's looking beyond, we talked that looking to the root of the problem, and going forward, applying that in the work phase. And that, I think, still has to work its way through the organization. I spoke of the buddy checks, but going beyond that. And then the supervisor looking at, if they're having a tough go, taking responsibility for it and speaking to them about it. And twice, where I was involved, called the member in involuntarily, and in very short order realized that they need some help, and be able to supply that by, calling up and saying, let's give this person some time here, some time off, and some help, and move forward. And in every situation of the two where I got people time off and help, where their peers identified the problem, or identified a problem, and then probing further. So that, I think, is becoming a little more commonplace, of peers recognizing it, bringing it to supervisors, and again to supervisors looking at, they're having a tough go here, maybe we should have a chat, and a very informal chat. And it's building that trust, and that comes down to the leadership, that the persons for whom you're responsible trust you, and know that there's nothing punitive about your efforts to help and move forward. And so it's organizational change, it's attitude change within the organization, within the unit, within the people. And that it's a journey. We'll never, ever perfect it, but we can all get better at our individual ambit in there.
So well stated, right? We all have a role to play. And I come into this kind of conversation as a researcher. And so when I think about what we need to learn, like you're saying, like there's still so much. And I think one of the things we want to put more emphasis on is to better understand what families need at different moments. So not just in crisis, right? But at different points. Crisis is important. We want to be there to support families. I don't want to imply that we're, that's not a serious time, but we want to be thinking about this throughout the entire kind of trajectory for the individual and their family, and figure out how can we embed prevention into like everyday practices and not just leave it to these moments of crisis and these episodes that can affect individuals so profoundly and their family systems. So I think the other thing that you folks are kind of pointing or getting me to think about is just the complexities of ways of honoring the deceased while also centering like the living and what families need. Because this can be such a challenging time. And as both of you have spoken to this, opening up spaces for families to actually experience the wide gamut of emotions that can arise in the loss of a loved one. So I know I'm taking it back here a little bit, but Mike, you were speaking earlier about all of the work that you've done in this space. And I know another area of progress has been in working to differentiate. And again, this is still a journey, something that's ongoing, but working to differentiate a line of duty death from because of duty death and some of the work that's gone into this. And I'm just wondering if you could speak on this for a few minutes and tell us, just to give us a sense of what that's involved.
I'd speak to the result first, that, if we look in Ontario, because there was that real line and that old stubbornness that they died on the line of duty. They, took their lives and going forward. And that was a real hard wall. But if you look at where we're building the memorial to members who have died by through the line of duty rather than by the line of duty, if they're opposite one another in the same police memorial park in Ontario. And it's accepted, where 3-4 years ago, you could almost feel the physical reticence, physical amongst some, that this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But if you look at my own experience as an observer, when we have our, for the families of the fallen of the Ontario Provincial Police, Solace members come to the breakfast of the Soul members. Soul and Solace are getting close as organizations and moving forward. And police officers are moving to the understanding or trying to realize that, it could be one significant event that impacts that member that, has PTSD that could lead to ideations and moving forward, or it could be a culmination of many, many incidents coming together and going forward. It's different in every case. I'm not a psychologist, but it's different. Having tried to study because of friends that were having difficulties or took their lives, it's so very different in almost every circumstance how we got to this. And I think police officers are recognizing as a community, we're recognizing that, ergo in the buddy system and the talk, we're much more open to talking about it, to how we feel, to what's bugging us, and to checking and extracting it from members that are being, stubbornly stoic. That was my line about my father, a retired police officer that towards the end of his life, as he was having physical illnesses, that stoicism is our enemy, his stoicism. And I just bring that up into the stoicism amongst some police officers, amongst supervisors, and a false sense of toughness in some units, and that's gone or going. So even our premier tactical units are very, very alert to each other's mental health and how they're feeling and going forward. So I've wandered all over on you, Margaret, but
no, this is great. Actually, it gives me an opportunity to kind of, and Solace it's offering families a retreat, right? These are families.
It's a network. It's families of the fallen through the line of duty, and they support one another and go forward and have gatherings, have retreats, much the same as Soul. And it's a community. It builds a community. It creates discussion, but more than that, it shares the love of, I can say it, of each other from shared experiences or similar experiences. And if somebody's having a tough go, someone who has gone through that tough go is right there with them to help them. You see that on the Memorial Day when, they're all there and working through it together and going from there. Then that take it away from that event, that continues on through life over the next 364 days and going forward. So it's a community helping one another, and from that, helping us all because they share their experiences with us. And then it's their experiences when they tell us what exactly they went through and things that we would not have known save for them. So as much as we were friends and workers with someone who did take their life, there's stuff goes behind the scenes in those other 16 hours of every day that we never knew. And so sharing that with us helps to deepen our understanding. And from that understanding, then deepen our senses as to, signs that we should be picking up on to help somebody and move forward. So certainly Solace within Solace is a tremendous community of support and love. But then from that, the sharing of experiences with us who are trying to make it better for the policing community and bring in some prevention as best we can, working with professionals as yourselves. It gives us the understanding, but also the fuel, the fire to do something, and like the importance of the work of prevention within our community.
No, that's fantastic. I think listeners would be really interested to hear about that program. So that's kind of why I probed a little bit there. So thanks so much for giving us a bit of background on Solace and Soul. So just thinking about like looking ahead, and I guess I should also just mention that it sounds like that work with Solace is doing the important work of integrating what families know. Right. And valuing that. So I think that's excellent to see. But just looking ahead to think about what is most important for organizations or families, even communities, to think about or keep front of mind as they're working to prevent suicides within this population, but also support families who are struggling with losses associated with suicide. So that could be, like I say, organizations, it could be communities, it could be individuals or families, but what's something for them to kind of keep in mind? This is tough work, as we know, right? We kind of need to find motivation or inspiration in that drive, but just thinking about what's most important for organizations or communities or even families to kind of consider there.
I would really highlight the importance of education beforehand in terms of what mental health can look like, because it's little more subtle and a little sneakier, I think, than people assume. And when you're in that situation and you're living with it every day, it can kind of creep up on you quite slowly because you're not removed from it. And so you kind of adapt to the chaos a little bit day by day. It's incremental. In my particular situation, I had no idea I needed to be a detective in my own home. So it wasn't until it got really loud, very disruptive, to the point of highly dysfunctional, that I realized that we had bigger issues going on here. So I think the importance of just education in what PTSD can look like, because I think it shows up in ways that I think people might be a little bit surprised. It's not quite as obvious as one would assume. And then I think the inclusion of, we were talking about the memorials and whatnot. So I know for my particular circumstances and what we've gone through, my family isn't included in any of the memorials, so we're actually excluded. So there's still some work there to be done for sure within the RCMP. As far as I know, their memorials are only for the line of duty deaths. And because my family's in that gray area of the because duty death, we aren't actually, my late husband isn't honored. There's been talk of some memorials going up around Canada. I was part of quite a few discussions around that the last couple years. And last I heard now, I think it all kind of got put on the back burner, and I don't believe there's much moving forward with that I have heard. So removing that stigma, I think, from all avenues, before the death and then as well as after the death, because I feel it moving forward. And that's why I so avidly speak about it, because I think that is truly how you remove it.
Well, definitely. And I think what you highlight as well, when you talk about not knowing that you needed to be the detective in your own home, and your desire to provide this education to families, is that sort of fine balance. Because as you talked about earlier, once you do see those signs and you detect them, you don't really know who it's safe to talk to and what you can do. So that puts families in a really unique space where, okay, I think something's wrong, something's going on here, I'm not really too sure what it is, but I also don't know who it's okay to talk to, so I can get help for my family member, instead of making things worse for them. So a very challenging situation for families to be placed in this particular context.
Yeah, and especially if we're not going to acknowledge families in these memorials, right? Because as you just shared, Sherry, like there's some very palpable exclusion there, right? So, Mike, what do you have any advice for organizations or community? You've given us lots throughout our conversation today, but just as a way of moving looking forward.
I think I've been blessed institutionally, geographically, with the energy that's gone into this within the province of Ontario. So if you look, as Sherry mentioned, that there's no memorial for her husband, where there's no recognition, there's no blending in because of the duty and line of duty. Whereas, we look at the police services in Ontario, we've had a memorial wall for our members who have taken their lives within 75 feet of our line of duty death wall. Toronto Police Service, I believe it was last year, put up there because of line of duty, and it's moving throughout Ontario. There's a big movement. So hopefully that radius continues to grow. And I know that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are looking at it, and that I was contacted by them to, put them in touch with our people and the people at Toronto Police Service to get something going. So it's a slow journey. There's stigmas that have to be broken, traditionalists that have to move on. And it's a journey, but we're getting better at it, and it's working. I saw that physically in the change between our first memorial and our second memorial, the amount of senior police leaders and the amount of members and the amount of families and the embrace, metaphorically, amongst all the families, including soul members that came up to support the soulless members. So we're getting better, and if it serves as an example, that'd be wonderful. So.
And I will say it's really interesting because some of my best friends that I've met just on my journey the last few years are other widows within the RCMP, and their husbands died in the line of duty, and some of them even have statues and things like that. And it's just so interesting that we've been able to connect on such a deeper level that it's just irrelevant of how our husbands died. We see each other as grieving women, raising our kids and going through all of the ups and downs and the messiness and all of that's encompassed with the grief. And so a lot of it does just kind of come down to people's personalities and things like that as well, right? Where you connect with who you connect with. And I do think it's, everybody's job to show up in their best capacity with compassion and empathy for everyone moving forward, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, it was funny. My girlfriend and I were talking about that the one day, like how you would never know that we've had such different experiences because we're bound together by that raw, universal need for connection during our darkest times. So there's lots of hope. There's lots of good people out there doing lots of good things. So I'm really happy to hear that Ontario is moving in this direction and that the RCMP is having conversations. So that shows that there's movement happening. And I think that's the start of anything. So I'm really happy to hear that, Mike.
And I speak about institutions, but we have to recognize that Canada Beyond the Blue was kicked off by two women, putting it forward. One lost their brother, the other police officer. But if we look at Dell and Crystal, they're the ones that got it going. They're the ones that keep it going. And they're the ones that have instilled the fire in there. So as much as we talk about policing and police institutions, it's the families but for the families, we wouldn't have that wall and we wouldn't have the memorial being built. And they're telling of their story to the police officers that are engaged and going forward is what's working. So, but for the families, we would not have a memorial.
And I think even, when we talk about families moving forward, even the importance of supporting the kids. So I know Frontline Families Canada, they have healing retreats every summer, and it's for the widowers, I guess, either, and the kids. And I remember when the first year that we went to a camp like that, and my kids were sitting around a table coloring, and everyone was just normalizing talking about how their dads died. And I remember my kids later that night saying, "Oh my gosh, Mom, like no one here has dads. And that, so-and-so's dad took their life too." And they just felt so normal. And that was as a mom to have my kids find that connection with these other kids. So it's so much more than just the widows behind, because grief impacts everybody. It's lifelong. So, and of course it trickles down to the kids. So having that support for the kids as well, I think is, very important.
Absolutely. And it sounds like they sometimes get forgotten in the discussion or in the bigger picture. But you've both highlighted that, yes, progress is being made. It's not necessarily, consistent everywhere. But I think you've also highlighted the incredible impact that individuals can have in making change and in doing something new and different, and the impact that can have on those who are affected. And so as we get ready to wrap up the conversation, I want to ask you both, if you could think of one thing that you know, would hope that our listeners might take away from today's discussion, what would that be? I know I have a whole list of things I've written down from what you've both said, but from your point of view, if there was one thing that you would hope our listeners might take away from the discussion, what would that be?
I'll grab that because I often speak I've repeated a number of times my work with Commissioner Creek, but as he worked to change the character within the Ontario Provincial Police and take us to where we're at today and go forward and working with them like daily, continuously. His big thing was one at a time, change one person at a time, fix one thing at a time. So my big thing would be to impact one person and change their knowledge, understanding, and energy directed towards this and move forward from that. Then that one person will affect one and will go forward. But without a great big grand vision, I think if we can each work to make one person better at understanding, at acting, and at helping. And we've done what we can. It starts with one.
Yes, thanks, Mike.
I completely agree with that. And from an organizational point of view, I think having those policies in place beforehand. We made a lot of impact after my husband's death, where we were rewriting and revising, and it wasn't the time to do that. So I think having the policies and procedures in place beforehand so that they're actually serving the people that they're meant to serve, and not to be afraid to amend them. They're made by people. They get revised by people. They are meant to serve the people that they're meant to serve. And if they're not, it's okay to make changes to them. And that's a sign of growth. It's not a sign of failure, it's a sign of growth. So from that standpoint, the organizational standpoint, I really believe in that. And just from a human standpoint, just being kind to one another. You just don't know what's going on behind closed doors. We were so amazing at acting like everything was fine for much longer than we should have. And, you just don't know what's going on behind closed doors. So just be kind to one another always. I know there were a lot of people after my husband took his life that were just kind of had to take a moment and pause because they had no idea he was struggling like he was. So just that importance of just that little piece of humanity.
Well, that's true. And I think that brings it full circle to what you said right in the beginning, Sherry, that, just listening, just sitting there with somebody, having a cup of coffee with them and listening and connecting on that human level. And you've both talked about the fact, Mike, you just said that it doesn't have to be a big grand plan. You start with making small differences, and you keep taking steps in that direction every day. And Sherry, I like the fact that you talked about you don't have to get it perfect. You can make mistakes. If the policies aren't working, they can be rewritten, they can be changed. So continually learning and informing that discussion, I think, is key to ongoing progress in this area. So I want to thank you both, Sherry and Mike, for having this discussion with us today. It's not always an easy topic to discuss, especially when it reflects people's personal experiences over a number of years. So I want to thank you both for being so gracious in talking to us today. And as we conclude this series, we really hope that listeners come away with a deeper understanding of how families' research and practice in this area can intersect and contribute to, prevention, intervention, and postvention. As we've heard, while there are no simple answers, we hope that the insights that have been shared not only in today's episode, but across the episodes will highlight the importance of keeping families, so both spouses and children, centered in this conversation, integrating diverse perspectives, and then continuing to, be creative and innovative in finding ways that can help to save lives and support those who are impacted by suicide. So thank you both so much for the impact you've had not only today on our discussion, but in your communities. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you again. Thanks.